Welcome to the TeachClimate Network meeting, where we're going to discuss the book Rising by Elizabeth Rush, and then a few other things as well, climate change education in general. But we are a climate generation, a well-staggered legacy. We empower individuals and their communities to engage in solutions to climate change. So, somebody was joining there or not.
I think that was a text, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. So with this TeachClimate Network, it's great to have you both with us here tonight. Obviously, this is established for you as educators or people who work with teachers. So always let us know if you have ideas for books or anything else that we could do. We're having one more network meeting coming up this May. We'll take a break for summer and then kind of reassess next fall what we want to do and what you all would like to do. But if we want to just go around. Yeah?
I have started the May book.
Oh, good. Did you guys ever read Grapes of Wrath in school?
I don't think it ever made my mandatory reading list, and it's been one of those books I've wanted to read, so I'm thrilled to finally have purpose to get it done.
Yeah. I know. I had never read it in school. I somehow missed, I don't know if when I moved or something, but yeah, it never ended up on my.
So many books, so little time.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So if you guys want to do, we know each other, right? We're good with introductions. Sarah, Megan. Okay, cool. But yeah, we can, I have some questions about the book Rising. Some of them that I pulled from our reading guide. Have you guys looked at this yet?
Not much depth yet.
Yeah. So this is one of the new resources that we've created as reading guides for a bunch of these books. And so I pulled out the section that was Rising. So it's kind of nice.
Why not?
Yeah, it gives a synopsis, discussion questions, quotes, and links to some articles, which we can kind of go through tonight too. But the chapter that we pulled out was the first one. Actually, maybe it's the second in the book, but Persimmons, Isle de Jean Charles in Louisiana. So I don't know if Sarah, you can remember all the stories that you read, if this is the particular one that you recall.
I do remember. She goes, she talks about the area a couple of times throughout the book.
Oh, okay.
And I thought it was, a good connection for me anyways, because last year our first book was Exodus. And during our book club conversation, we ended up talking about the island of de Charles and that connection that we can make with with our students. So when she started talking about it in this book, I was like, oh yeah, this is great.
Yeah. Wendy, are you familiar with where this is located, or have you heard about this area?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of told by the woman who is going to all these places. The subtitle of this book is Dispatches from the New American Shore. Rising, obviously talking about sea level rise because of climate change. And so I think she's, figuring out what are the personal stories from these people that are experiencing displacement because of sea level rise, or just disruption to their culture, their environment, their way of life. And obviously this is kind of the first kind of biggest one that our, United States is experiencing. And so, yeah, it's really, I think it's just so good to have a personal review and connection to these places to make it real, especially for students. So, yeah. Well, this talks about, obviously, the rise of sea level in the bayou and how they're really just losing their land. I mean, obviously it was all surrounded by water anyway, and is just kind of disappearing at an unprecedented rate. And so a lot of talk is the value of place. And I think that's a good discussion question or idea to think about is, like, what is the value of a place? What does it mean for the people who live there, the animals and plants that live there? How do we measure the value of it? What it gives us or what we can do there? Do you guys have thoughts on any of that?
Well, I mean, those are like some of the biggest questions of all, right? And you think about your existence in terms of a context.
Mm-hmm.
And few people realize how important that is to defining who they are or what they understand or know to be true until that context is no more or is threatened.
Yeah.
And my probably my most experience of that in my life is having grown up in the American Southwest and thinking from my early childhood about Native Americans and their value of place and their relationship with the land, and then the displacements they experienced. And in my experience, seeing that almost as a scar on their very existence, with their value of place having been stripped away as a people. And so that's how I,
Yeah, for sure.
There's Lucy.
Hello.
So I'm, just to complete that thought, I mean, I personally haven't experienced it that way. My family's been fairly nomadic, and so I've learned to make my life where my people are mostly. But I certainly think my formative years watching people who had lost their sense of place struggle without it feels very relevant to those that will be affected by sea level rise. It's just a different reason for the displacement, right?
Right.
Yeah, and having that sense of place in somewhere that you feel connected, that you're most comfortable, you know, where you, not so much where you belong, but that you can always go back to and find some familiarity with that. That if it is challenged by any other things such as climate change, that you have that connection and maybe even strive to fight for it and to do something about it. Where those that might have lost that sense really could care less. So having these connections to our kids about other areas around the world that maybe don't see any connection to climate change in their region could maybe help bring that home to them.
Lucy, welcome. Can you hear us?
Yes,
Okay.
I can. Can you hear me?
Great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can just do brief introductions. I don't know if you have met any of us before. We welcome you to the TeachClimate Network. I'm glad you're able to join us.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm Megan Van Lowe, and I'm with Climate Generation.
Okay.
So.
I'm Lucy Garcia, and I'm not sure who I'm with right now in terms of teaching climate, but I just retired last June from teaching at Van Nuys High School in California for 18 years, 20 years, and I always taught climate change, and I always did like I always made my kids do a conference on it for the parents in the community, the school, and that's it. I think the rest of you know each other a little bit, right?
Sorry, I've got kids in the background.
That's great.
I'm Sarah Niemeyer. I teach junior high and high school science, life and earth science, and I have a semester-long climate class that I also teach. I've done it for 2 years now.
Awesome.
I'm in Southeast Minnesota in Wabasha. And I have 2 little boys that you'll hear in the background here every once in a while.
That's good.
And I'm Wendy Abshire. I'm the director of the education program for the American Meteorological Society.
I can't hear her.
Hi, guys.
I want to hear her. I want to hear her.
And we offer professional development courses to teachers to learn more about weather, ocean, and climate science. And so this book club is really relevant for our work as well.
Great. Well, Lucy, did you get a chance to download the chapter we sent?
I did,
And check it
and
out?
I read it.
Oh, well, look at that. 1 for 1. Well, the first question I had posed, and we can chat more about it and other things, but talking about the value of a place and, you know, being displaced from that and what that means with climate change and how that changes your culture, your identity, or, you know, what does it mean to value a place in itself as well. So kind of chatting about that.
You know, the thing that I got from the chapter was less a sense, you know, well, there was a sense of displacement, but it was more a sense that the place was falling apart.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and then
That's what
people
I
were
got out of it.
choosing to leave or stay and try to deal with
How much it's just falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's disintegrating. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, having the part where, you know, instead of having what you used to have on land, you now have like dolphins there.
Yeah.
That just like blows my mind to think of that your landscape could change so much that like a dolphin could be like swimming in your a place where your like yard was or whatever. And like, it's just such a stark difference.
I saw YouTube, there was about sea level rise, and it made the claim that the coastline is the most important line on the face of the earth. And this is the first time in, I don't know how many tens, Wendy would probably know better, but how many thousands of years that it's changing, hundreds of thousands of years that it's actually changing place. 11 maybe, 11,000.
Yeah, it's actually not a number I store, but I mean, we've been in a remarkably stable period, right?
Yeah.
Which we are disrupting.
Yeah.
So something about our conversation and, you know, in the book club wandering sense, if I was sitting with you all or wine on the same couch, the next thing I would say is suddenly this conversation is reminding me, I wonder if there is a meaningful difference between how you lose your place. So my first reference was being forcibly displaced. This context is sea level rise. So essentially your land is drowning. And then I was suddenly thinking about the Native Hawaiian experience or anyone else that's in the land of rebirth by volcanism, which you lose your place because it's buried, but my limited understanding of how the Native Hawaiians view that is that it's a rebirth and it's a part of the process. And I don't have the sense that the Native Hawaiians feel the same way about their place being displaced by the volcanic islands. It's more accepted as a way of life, which I haven't heard anyone saying that about sea level rise and the drowning of their home. Mm. And it's maybe it's a cultural longevity of, it's a part of their history, right? As opposed to, I don't think we have a part of our history saying, well, we know that the water will come and take everything away at all our coastlines. Mm-hmm.
Although I think I read something that the indigenous people of Australia were aware, have stories of when sea level was way different. Hmm. And you know, they go back, what, 14,000 years there? Huh?
That might not be cli-fi, but that sounds like a fascinating book club story to find books on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is this fiction? Is this a fiction book?
This is not
with all real stuff, basically, you know, sort of like historical fiction in the future.
This is actually nonfiction. So she actually went to these places and these people and interviewed them. So it's the real stories, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of has the restraint of a real story.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I should find the article, but I think it was just up for a Pulitzer Prize, this book, this year. So that's cool. I'll have to finish it. But yeah, I think there's something different with the loss of your home to something natural versus something that was like humans' fault and shouldn't be the case. Like that's what I feel personally, is that we're doing something wrong here and that's why we're losing our place, versus like a natural disaster or something that's, I don't know, I guess you could think of it with an argument too of wildfires or extreme weather in general. With climate change, obviously extreme weather is increasing, but we've always had it. So it's like, what if you lose your home to a fire or a tornado? Now, I mean, like obviously it's always a loss, but just thinking of it in that way too.
I think another thing is the scale of it. I mean, even the largest wildfire is so localized, where it's just like it's global climate change, it's global sea level rise, although yes, different seas, different amounts, different coastlines with different impacts, but coastlines around the world and persons of many different cultures, and as we know, many that are some of the lower socioeconomic, persons will be most adversely affected because they have the least ability to adapt. So I think that's another sense of while it's a local displacement, it's a global phenomenon. It brings a really different dynamic than any one storm.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, maybe all these coastal places end up being connected because they share the same story of sea level rise and having to find a new place to live.
And new things to eat, right? I mean, the sense of that this area doesn't have the richness that it had before, is what I was getting out of this chapter too. You know that in an English class, we'd have to back all this up with quotes, right? From the chapter.
Pull it out. I have my little cat here. Well, then I'm thinking about the term, maybe like climate refugees, and what we see as the future of where people can live and what that is going to have different, effects on, a lot of it being social, and which leads to economic and political and all these things of issues of where these people are going to live, let alone the loss of their culture and identity and all those things with the place. But yeah, have you guys talked with your students before, or like about climate refugees, or the idea of moving or accepting people into a new community?
I haven't had those conversations with explicitly with anyone.
I was talking to a guy that I don't have a whole lot of people anymore, but I was just talking with a guy on the street who was sort of a Trump supporter, and and he was an immigrant and against more immigration, the typical thing. And I was explaining to him that when I explained that Honduras was going through a bad drought, it had this dry corridor, and it was going through a bad drought, and that was the reason that so many of these people were coming here, was because they just couldn't make it there anymore. He was like, so I think there is some sense of, I think there's a lot of compassion that can be motivated when people realize that we're all here together in the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, you see it all the time when hardship hits, but then sometimes you see the lack of compassion when it's either the competition
Yeah.
or other social pressures that bring out the other.
Yeah. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Go to bed.
no.
He looks so much like you.
Oh, thanks. I was gonna say, my high school classes last year, I had them read the book Exodus, and talked about how they had to leave their country, their island, because it was being flooded and waters were rising, and the hopes of this new place to go live, and then to get there and realize they're not letting anybody in. There's this refugee camp outside the wall of all these boats, and talk about, you leave your place, right, and try to make a new somewhere else, but it's not
I want to talk.
what you had before.
I want to talk.
You can talk.
You want to hear?
No, what you doing?
You can talk right now.
All
I
right.
want to talk to them. I want to talk to them.
You can talk to them right now. Do you want to hear them talk to you?
Yeah.
Hi.
Boys.
Hi, guy in Yoda pajamas.
I
What's your name?
want to hear them talk to me. And then you can't tell. Hi.
Hello, other guy off
Hi.
screen.
Hi.
Hi.
Go to bed.
No. That's fun. Mom, which one of these doing a big?
Went mute.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, such a big topic, right? Like at the highest level, I know that the reason initially the U.S. military was concerned about climate change was because of global unrest.
Mm-hmm.
And the global unrest comes for competition of resources and displacements of persons. And I think they're still exceedingly concerned about all of that associated with climate change. They have the capacity to respond in terms of adaptation, in terms of military bases. I mean, that's real, right? Military bases, but naval bases are at coastlines, infrastructure is being impacted with sea level rise. But they have the ability to respond. But in terms of what they think they're responding to, I think it's a tremendous amount of global unrest due to exodus.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
A point I had to make with my students is not something I like to make, but I had to make with my high school students was that when the whole Syrian thing was happening, was that the drought, which was tied scientifically to climate change, displaced 1.3 million people, but humans took that and turned it into 13 million people. So, our political systems make a huge difference in what actually happens to people under these conditions. In fact, they didn't even have to be displaced in the first place if they'd have listened to the agronomists, in the 1980s who were saying this is not the proper set of crops to grow in this area.
Yeah, the subject of many book clubs. Oh.
What's the book Exodus? Is it a book?
Yeah, that's not kind
But is it Julia Bertanga, I believe, is the author? Fiction book, and it's part of a trilogy.
Lucy, one of the great things about the past webinars is that the recording of the book and the author and the discussion are available from past ones. I wasn't a part of that one either.
Oh, that's awesome.
Find it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah, it's kind of dystopian type fiction book of what could be a young adult novel, but good for talking about climate change for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Hit us up with another tough question.
I know, I'm just looking. So I found one that John Holdren, so the Obama's science advisor, famously said, "We basically have three choices: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering." And then he, just asked, like, which of those felt most dominant, if any, and if you read more of the book or during this article, or when you think about sea level rise. We have three choices: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. Is there any right way to, to deal with sea level rise? Or, like, do you mitigate and try to stay like this guy was doing, with like no one else really there, or sorry, adapt and try to stay? Or, the mitigation kind of has happened before, or do you just end up suffering?
Well, thinking about adapting, putting your houses up on stilts, and then it talked about this gentleman, he had to replace the entire interior of his home because the water came in, after he had already built up his house. That he's kind of suffering in a way. You adapt, and then a bigger storm comes, and you adapt to that, and a bigger storm comes. So there comes a time where how much more adapting can you do? Which is hard for these individuals that's their home. That's been their livelihood for generations now. And it's at no fault of their own.
I think there's a difference between adapting, like this, remember there was this question of how to, in the chapter, like they were going to move as a group. They were going to adapt as a group. And I think that might have been maybe less suffering if they could have got it together, that everybody was going to go together as a group. I don't know.
I'm absolutely not an expert in this, but I do know, I remember maybe as much as 10 years ago already, some Native Alaskan communities were already making decisions and moving as a community to either safe higher ground and nearby, or even Pacific Islanders and to just a new island with a better setup. And I can only imagine, but if you could preserve your community, even if your whole community moved and it was a collective decision, I would think that would help ease suffering, because for one, it was proactive, and for another, you maintained your community even if you lost your place. But there's only unique circumstances that make that possible, right? It has to be a group of a certain size with a place to go. Tens of people or even a couple hundred is a whole different ball of wax than entire major metropolitan areas that happen to be at coastlines.
Yeah.
I think that, with the mitigation, adaptation, and suffering, as someone who's been watching this for my whole life, as a child in the 70s, we knew this was coming. So it's like the anticipated suffering with all the cries for mitigation so that we didn't have to suffer, and the suffering is happening. I think that's the hardest part, is that suffering will happen. That's what makes these really tough conversations. It's not fair. It's not just. And at this point in my mind, I don't see it as being completely avoidable anymore.
It's not avoidable. I saw another, I have a lot of time on my hands. I saw on YouTube about with this guy who was a writer and a journalist from Belgium, who was talking about how it's not a cliff. We're not headed for a cliff. It's he didn't put it this way, but it's sort of like a long rocky slope, and we're already going down it, and people are suffering because of, what we're doing now. And the question is how much more, as scientists, we know that there are worse tipping points that'll make it impossible for, the colonial view of things. Let them suffer, but we're doing great. That's not going to happen eventually. But it's already, people are already suffering from it.
Yep.
and trying to adapt and also moving on it. You know, the people are doing all three of those at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, and I
It's
think
like,
the suffering tends to be on the most vulnerable, the people who have the least power to do something about it are probably contributing the least to the problem. So yeah, it's like, how do we get the compassion and the empathy for humanity and the earth, and like right now, above all else.
Well, as someone who teaches teachers so that they're confident in these topics, I mean, I think the whole knowledge is so essential, right? If you don't understand geography, you don't understand space and scale, you don't understand, go along later, you're teaching high school, you don't understand physics and thermal expansion, you don't understand thermal flows and fluid motion, then I don't know how you would understand climate change, right? So that's the context in which I understand it. And just with the severe weather outbreak in the Southeast, my community is in an uproar because we try to warn people to save their lives from tornadoes geographically. And most people don't know where they are. They don't know their own location on a map. They don't know the name of the county they live. They don't know northeast, south, and west from where they are. How do you inspire people to action to move out of harm's way, or that you are in harm's way, if they don't know where they're at? So, my first sense is teachers reaching children with knowledge so that they can begin to grasp some of these essential issues that climate change will make unavoidable in their lives. Otherwise, there's no common starting place for having the conversation. Other than hunger, which, you won't have food to eat. That won't matter where you are.
I want to take that comment and put it up in a little bow and in quotes. It's so good. I mean, it's like, it's what we always try to convey too. So I love that. It is, a lot of it is about education and understanding and having a world view.
Yeah, I mean, if you really have never suffered and you've never gone anywhere and you don't understand how big space is, if you've never traveled and you don't understand the distance between here and there, or you've never been to a coastline, I mean, I just can't imagine how this becomes real to you. I mean, we have video, right? So that can be a powerful tool. But I still think understanding space and distance is essential.
Do you know what? I think that this is, so much a science teacher's thing, but it's also so much a whole school thing. Because, like Climate Generation is doing this absolutely wonderful work in terms of, vetting materials and, and lessons and so on for science teachers. And now a couple of good resources for, for English teachers. And I guess there's something for social sciences too. But here's the thing, we need each school to make a decision together, all the stakeholders to come together and make a decision. To what extent are we going to put climate change at the center of what we're teaching? Why is it that we haven't, despite everything that we're doing to try to prepare kids for the 21st century, why is it that we're sidelining this feature of the 21st century, this essential feature of the 21st century? Why are we sidelining it? And the first question is, why are we doing it? Then we can get to how to not do it.
Well, I mean, my own take is that the merchants of doubt were successful. They delayed the conversation for financial gain, and that's why. I mean, we've known.
I think it's deeper. I think it's deeper than that, though, because I think that people. I don't think adults. First of all, you're an adult with 30 kids, right? the only thing that really threatens your job is, lack of classroom management. You don't control the kids, right? So here you are, an adult, and you're telling them, we messed up thoroughly. Your life is screwed because of what we did. So listen to us, take our direction, learn everything that we're telling you, it's like, it kind of might.
It's a tough message, that's for sure.
Yeah, it kind of cuts across so I'm wondering if part of our resistance is not just concern for the kids, which we do have concern for the kids, because, for me, I'm in high school, and our school had 50 something calls for people, kids who were thinking of committing suicide last year.
Wow.
50 something. So, I mean, you don't want to add on to that, but at the same time, ignoring it is adding on to it. So you can't do that either, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you raised
so part of it is not that. It's part of it is just concern for ourselves, really, I think. But maybe I'm being.
No, I think that's very real. I think that's very real. Part of why many adults won't face the issue and are in denial is that it's such a big problem that they can't believe that the comfortable life while they were busy living the American dream their entire existence, they thought they were following the rules and doing good things, and now to be told it was all a big mistake and the damage they've left, it's too much to comprehend, and they can't undo it, and they don't want it to be true. And by they, I mean me too, right? I mean,
Right.
Well, yeah, it's kind of shaking of your identity in a way of, especially if you're more of that mentality that like, I worked hard, I should get what I want, which is not something I believe, but yeah.
It was the rules for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Material wealth was the dream that was sold.
Right.
Well, it's a shrinking of your moral self too.
Mm-hmm.
You think you thought that you were doing right. And it turns out you were doing things that were deeply immoral, and you didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many baby lessons there that could be the psychology of it and the teaching of children, especially you think about high schools and the rich conversations of, what do you tell a parent that worked hard, raised money, got all 3 kids cars, and each one of those cars went out there doing car things?
Mm-hmm.
Were they doing wrong? One argument says yes they were, but they didn't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what they wanted was to give their kid freedom, right? So that we just, it's that we have to give their kid freedom in a different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kid wants freedom. I mean, there's a whole lot of kids who don't even want to learn to drive anymore. Have you noticed that? I don't know if you've noticed that.
No, it's totally true. It's a big change.
Yeah. But they want freedom. And a car is only partly freedom anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think the big thing too is thinking about like who has benefited from the fossil fuel industry and who has suffered because of it, and what changes do we need to make it more sustainable, knowing that we're probably still going to have a lot of cars on the road for the next foreseeable future, but like what can look different about that, or it's like changing the norms or changing society so that we still feel like we have freedoms and like luxuries and things, but we also are sustainable and thinking about our resources. And I think a lot of that is like the distribution of wealth too, which is a whole nother subject.
Yeah, bring that into the schools.
Yeah. Maybe being an ethics teacher is where it's at these days.
Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, I like that you bring up that climate change is not just in the science classroom, and historically it has sat there, but we all know, as teachers, it's not. It's interdisciplinary, and we're trying to even think of how we want to get it more into other classrooms too, especially with our institute this year focusing on humanities and social studies. But then like, yeah, what's after that to have, and how do you like get teachers to think of it as, you know, if you do teach English language arts or something, you know, why would they want to teach climate change, or how does it make sense to incorporate it? So that's something that we're trying to figure out too.
You know what? I think that we are headed in the right directions. I mean, with Common Core, right, is about skills, having skills to, you know, in critical thinking skills. It really is much more in that direction.
Mhm.
And I saw the you know, next generation science standards. They're like, you know, they're a whole nother layer better than the science standards that existed when I came in, which were students will know that, and listed a bunch of stuff. And then there was no students will be able to, none in the science studies, you know, at all. And so that's changed, and that's what we really need to do, right, is to prepare the kids with the information, as Wendy was saying, and the skills to enter into the conversation, because the conversation is a big, you know, it's the conversation of the century, which is, what are we going to do?
Mhm.
You know, how is humanity going to face this? What is the human way to do this?
Mhm. Mhm.
I suddenly, you probably saw my attention drift elsewhere because I'm reminded of a book I read a while ago now, maybe 2 years ago. And it was a wonderful book. And for the life of me, I haven't thought about it in a little while. So I was looking to see if I could find my notes. It was a book written by English teachers, leaders, who were basically saying, this problem is too big. Science is sidelined in too many classrooms. English teachers have no choice. And in fact, we have an obligation to take on climate change and use the teaching of language arts to tackle.
I want to know the book. You have to let me know what the book is.
It was compelling and well done, and they taught all those things, because you have to be able to do critical thinking, and you have to be able to write a thoughtful essay, and you have to be able to form logical arguments, and you have to be able to ferret out when people aren't doing those things. And they were committed to the idea that they were going to convert every English teacher to tackle this, and they had a roadmap for doing so. And now it'll take me a while to find it. I haven't thought about it in a couple years, but
Oh, I really want to do that. I really want to know them. This is what I want to do with my, you know, with the rest of my life, basically.
Awesome.
let me keep looking while you're talking, see if I can find it.
So I'm sorry, your name is Climate Generation on the screen here.
Yeah, Megan. Sorry.
What is Megan, right?
Megan, yeah.
Yeah, Megan. Hi, Megan. What do you teach?
So I'm the education coordinator at Climate Generation.
Yeah.
So I, like Wendy, similar, we coordinate trainings and conferences for teachers to their curriculum and teach climate change in the classroom. So I end up teaching climate change education. But yeah, I work a lot with, beyond teachers, we do go into classrooms sometimes with students. We have a youth program, and then we also work with the public a lot. So we just kind of finished up our Talk Climate Institute that was in Duluth, Minnesota, at the end of March. And so that engaged over 40 people from across the Midwest on how to talk about climate change. So kind of taking it in different audiences and angles to get people to start conversations and then take action, basically, and teach about it. So
are you working also with ACE, with the Alliance for Climate Education?
Yeah. Yep, they're a great partner, and their director of education knows our director of programs really well. And at any basically climate change education meetup across the country, they see each other, and yeah, they're doing awesome stuff out there too. And they have a huge reach across the country even. But do you work with them at all?
I worked with ACE when they were active in Los Angeles, and then I had my students do the assembly, even though they weren't here, to do it themselves. And one of our people became an ACE. One of our seniors became an ACE, representative or trainer. And
I'm just thinking, because you're in California, are you along the coast at all? Or where did you say you're from?
well, yeah, I am. I'm probably about an hour, less than an hour from the coast by car.
I'm just wondering if the conversation because I live in Minnesota, so I'm landlocked. Basically, we have the Great Lakes, but if you have, are people having conversations about the possible sea level rise, or is it maybe it's about wildfires or things like that, but are Californians talking about it?
Just a little. I mean, first of all, Los Angeles is, California has a different coast, right? It's steeper. It's a steeper coast because
Less of an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's less of an issue. I've seen, there's like some parts of mainly, to tell you the truth, it's up north. The Sacramento is more threatened than Los Angeles is, unbelievably, because it's lower altitude. And but no, they're not talking about too much about it except at the higher levels, because people don't see it. What they are talking about is, of course, the fires, the drought. We are really different with water than anybody else. You hear a little drip of water and you just can't stand it, and you turn it off. But kids are talking, we're talking about the drought. Now they think it's over.
Yeah.
Their understanding of sea level rise is, we'll all grow gills, That shows their understanding of evolution too.
Well, just quickly before we wrap up, I'm going to share my screen here because there's this link in the reading guide here that you can find online of this Climate Central, which I'm sure you two have seen before. We absolutely love using their stuff.
Yeah.
But the different maps and things that you can find here and put in information. So I think, making it relevant for people who don't live on a coast or what things might look like. But can even pick, have you seen this before, either of you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Surging Seas, I don't remember. But I've seen a mapping choice, but I thought it was Climate Central's map. Oh, I think it might have been NOAA's map. Is that possible? Do they have a mapping app like this too?
I'm not sure. Probably. We can pick a state.
It might be the same one, just different envelope on it.
But yeah, click on it. I don't know. I like that it's interactive and zooming in and out, and you pick a place where you actually live or know people. I was looking at this too for Isle de Jean Charles from the chapter too.
I didn't think to do that. That's a great thing to do.
Yeah, so I think this is showing the risk of, what can even change.
You see over here, see over there that on towards you see the green over there in the upper right-hand corner. That's Sacramento. Okay, around Sacramento.
Yeah.
Right. Stop. Places are inland, but they're.
Are you further south?
Oh yeah, I'm in Los Angeles.
Oh, you're way down here. Okay.
Yeah. So 500 miles away. I think we're going to lose parts of Long Beach, and that's about it, and parts of a little bit north of, but Los Angeles itself is not going to get much. You see that? We're not getting much here at all.
Right.
Even with 6 feet.
Down here.
That's a different situation entirely.
Yeah.
this is an inland sea caused by a breaking of the Salton Sea, and it was caused by humans. So it's not really going to rise with the ocean.
Sure.
If this is not true, this is not what is going to happen around there. There's not going to be that much water.
That's if it's 6 feet. I put it really high. It's not.
It's just that it's the reason it's not even, it's salty because of evaporation. It's not, it was created by the river. It's not connected to the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just a little bit, not Long Beach, what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know, this is a cool.
Absolutely wonderful thing. It's surging seas, right? This
Yeah.
is, I like it better. It seems more, it seems better, more easily manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
I like the little things on the side over here too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's kind of fun to play around with.
So what's happening with what will happen with the Great Lakes? With it's not going to affect, sea level rise won't affect the Great Lakes, right?
Not that I know of. They're now, because it's fresh water, it's actually really good to be near them. I think the storms are what is going to be the biggest impact, and then the shoreline of the towns along the lakes that will be impacted by bigger storm surges. But yeah, the rising waters isn't an issue, I don't think.
Do you have, are people are really confused, I think, by the fact that we have I've forgotten what it's called now. Wendy, I'm sorry. Where the jet stream takes a dip and then brings the polar air in.
A trough?
Well, yeah, but there's another word for it. There's another term that you have for that, where the polar, where the polar, yeah.
You're talking about a polar vortex?
Yeah, there you go. That's the word.
Yeah.
Yeah. The polar vortex, dips down into, or is that the definition of it? Anyway, the point is that it kind of, when you have this Arctic air coming into the Midwest, it probably really helps, people who are confused and are trying to cause confusion to argue their side.
Mm-hmm.
Year after year, lots of blizzards and snowstorms.
Mm-hmm.
Are people
I think
seeing?
I might have found the book, so I'm checking to see if this is it.
Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, we had the polar vortex here in Minnesota this year. And I think the biggest thing is, I do like that it's climate change now instead of global warming, trying to get people to realize it's not, that it's cold one day, that it means it's not happening. I would like to think we're getting past that kind of thing, and to understand what the polar vortex means. And it's obvious that it's climate change, and look at Alaska's temperature and stuff. So maybe if it does happen more often, people will understand it more. Not that we want it to.
So this is where, as a meteorologist, it gets like when the more you know about any one thing, then you know all the subtleties. The polar vortex has always been there, and there's really, it's so complicated to explain how a changing thermal pattern of the planet impacts the flow of cold and warm air masses. And so really it's so hard to say there will be more or less polar vortices. It all has to just do with the cold air at the poles.
Sure.
A polar vortex is just a trough. So it's be careful simplifying it. It's not like there will be more, you can't say there will be more hurricanes, there will be more this, there will be more that. It's so complex.
I thought that there was, let me check if this is right, Wendy, because the poles are warming faster than the rest of the Earth, because there is greater difference, because warming faster, I thought that what happened was the difference of temperature was what maintained a nice straight a jet stream, polar jet stream.
Yeah, well, there's
when there's less of it.
There's rarely a straight jet stream, right? I mean,
Right.
it tends to be in a wavy pattern.
Right.
And you have less light at the poles. So, I mean, there's always a colder mass up there.
It will be colder, of course, but what I'm saying is
it's a fluid. So it flows and it gets wavy. But then, I mean, starting from there, what does it mean with if it's colder or less colder, if it's warmer below or less cold above? I mean, the dynamics are wildly complex, and I would have to go read all the state-of-the-art papers on, does anyone really understand exactly what they expect to be different in climate models? There is not something I've read, but just it's complicated.
Good research topic, for sure.
I did find a book. It's called Teaching Climate Change to Adolescents. Reading.
Oh my God.
Teaching, Writing, and Making a Difference. And it's written by English teachers.
Oh, this is awesome.
And it's really compelling.
Oh, I am going to buy that book as soon as we.
This book is the essential resource for middle and high school English language arts teachers.
That's awesome.
I read the whole thing and I thought it was amazing.
All right.
Do you want the names of the authors, or have you already found it because of Google?
I don't know how to do two things on the computer at once. So.
The authors are Richard Beach, Jeff Scher, and Alan Webb. And yeah, I think it's probably been 3 years since I read it, because it was really like I had to trigger my deeper memories.
That's great. Well, we can definitely include that. I want to check it out too, especially with kind of taking it into different classrooms.
They had me convinced. I was like, well, maybe I should just turn in my science education. We should leave it to the English teachers and just make sure they have what they need. At least there's still thought in every classroom.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I'm just looking at the time and it's been about an hour. So any final thoughts or nuggets or?
There's a really nice book, which I always recommend to everybody that I talk to on these things. And that's called Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And it's, she's a native, forgotten what tribe. She's with, and she's an ecologist. And it's just the most loving, lovely book that raises very deep questions about the culture and the way to relate to Earth and the way to view Earth. And so there's good science in there.
I love
There's
the title.
Yeah.
Say it again.
It sounds good, and I love the title.
Yeah, Braiding Sweetgrass.